Hey, Morgan. Well, yes, the Senate just adopted a resolution that would overturn the powers that Trump used to set up many of his tariffs. This is the IEPA. It's the one that's going in front of the Supreme Court and being debated on. You know, Congress, they do get to assert their power over whether or not the president can continue to use that. And so they put forward a resolution today. It's actually the third one this week that the Senate has approved. This one is on all tariffs that use IEPA. We saw one yesterday focused on Canada and then one on Tuesday that was focused on Brazil. And you did see either 4 to 5 Republicans join with Democrats to overturn Trump's power. Now, it really is more of a symbolic vote at this point because we don't expect the House to be taking that up. So for now, it seems like Trump's tariffs will be in place.
68 votes. That's not a routine Senate tally. That's a constitutional tremor, because when more than 20 members of a president's own party join the opposition to strip him of unilateral power, you're not watching policy disagreement. You're watching a fracture in authority. And this time, the fracture is deliberate. The Senate has moved to claw back Donald Trump's ability to impose tariffs without congressional approval, not symbolic disapproval, not a messaging amendment, a direct removal of a weapon he has used for years to punish allies, pressure adversaries, and posture as the lone defender of American industry. 68 to 29, a margin large enough to override a veto. Let that sink in. His signature on this issue is now optional.
The president's imposition of tariffs against Canada that will be a costly tax increase on American families. If the president has concerns about trade issues with Canada, guess what? This president negotiated a signature trade deal, the USMCA, that got 89 bipartisan votes in this chamber, and he has a negotiating process.
And the tariff vote isn't even the only rebellion that happened.
Think this is about trade spreadsheets and import duties. You're already underestimating it, because tariffs were never just economic instruments for Trump. They were leverage, they were spectacle, they were proof of dominance. When Congress strips that authority, it's not adjusting policy, it's amputating executive reach. Why does that matter? Because the Constitution assigns Congress the power to regulate commerce. Over time, lawmakers handed that authority to presidents through emergency statutes and national security loopholes. Trump exploited those gaps aggressively, declared threats, invoked executive discretion, acted first, explained later. For years, Capitol Hill complained but complied, until now. This vote says something far more destabilizing than "we disagree." It says, "we don't trust you." And that is a different category of rebuke. When a president's own party assembles a veto-proof majority to restrain him, fear has shifted. The intimidation calculus has changed. But that wasn't the only tremor. Around the same time, the Senate advanced a war powers resolution aimed at limiting Trump's ability to escalate military action in Venezuela. It did not ultimately become law, but the procedural vote alone sent a signal that cannot be undone. Republican senators were willing, publicly, to constrain the commander-in-chief's capacity to deploy force without explicit authorization. Think about the constitutional gravity of that. Article 1 grants Congress the power to declare war. Article 2 names the president commander-in-chief. For decades, presidents have stretched that tension to its breaking point. Military actions initiated without formal declarations, Congress funding conflicts it never formally approved. Institutional drift masquerading as pragmatism. Now, senators are pulling back. Even the attempt reframes the balance. Because once lawmakers demonstrate willingness to invoke the war powers resolution against a president from their own party, the myth of untouchability evaporates. And Trump's power has always depended on that myth. Reports indicate he responded the way he always does. Personal calls, threats of primary challenges, accusations of betrayal. That playbook worked before. Loyalty through fear. Defiance punished swiftly. But here's what's different. The vote already happened. The line was crossed. And once lawmakers survive that crossing, the threat loses oxygen. This is where it gets more dangerous. For years, impeachment was framed as the ultimate constitutional remedy. Twice, the Senate refused to remove him. The argument was that removal would destabilize the republic, that elections, not lawmakers, should decide. But what if there is another method? Not removing the president, removing his instruments, tariff authority curtailed, war powers scrutinized, vetoes overridden. Piece by piece, Congress reclaims delegated powers. Leave the title intact. Hollow out the reach. That is not impeachment, it is containment. And containment is quieter. It does not create a martyr. It does not electrify a base with images of persecution. It simply reduces capacity. A president still seated in the Oval Office, but increasingly unable to act unilaterally. Symbol without supremacy. Why now? Because economic consequences accumulate. Tariffs imposed under national security justifications triggered retaliation abroad. Farmers lost export markets. Supply chains tightened. Consumers absorbed higher costs. Republican senators in competitive states heard the backlash. Polling shifts when grocery bills rise. Ideology bends when re-election is threatened. This is not moral awakening. It is political survival. But survival-driven defiance can be just as destabilizing to executive power as principle-driven revolt. Once senators calculate that standing with Trump costs more than opposing him, the gravitational pull weakens. And once fear dissipates, institutional memory returns. The founders designed separation of powers precisely to prevent consolidation. Yet over decades, Congress ceded ground. Emergency declarations, broad trade statutes, expansive interpretations of commander-in-chief authority. Presidents of both parties accumulated tools. Trump weaponized them openly, unapologetically, sometimes recklessly. So when the Senate votes 68-29 to take one of those tools back, it is not just reacting to Trump, it is correcting a pattern. And corrections of power rarely stop at one instrument. Here's the escalation no one wants to articulate. If Congress proves it can override him on tariffs, what stops it from asserting itself on budgets, on investigations, on enforcement of subpoenas, on confirmation battles? Authority, once reclaimed, tends to cascade. The House has already signaled alignment by moving to roll back specific tariff policies. That means this is not isolated to one chamber. Bicameral friction against the executive creates structural pressure, and structural pressure, sustained, reshapes governance. Consider the psychological dimension. Trump's leadership style relies on dominance displays, public humiliation of dissenters, framing opposition as weakness. But dominance requires compliance. When 22 Republican senators vote against him and survive politically, the aura cracks. Other lawmakers watch. They calculate. If colleagues withstand threats without immediate destruction, defiance becomes contagious. Power built on intimidation erodes once intimidation fails. That erosion has consequences beyond one presidency. If Congress successfully narrows tariff authority now, future presidents inherit a more constrained office. If war powers are scrutinized aggressively, unilateral military action becomes riskier. This moment, framed as partisan rebellion, could evolve into institutional recalibration. But recalibration cuts both ways. A weakened presidency can prevent abuse. It can also slow crisis response. The tension between energy in the executive and deliberation in the legislature is permanent. The question is whether this shift is corrective balance or reactionary swing. And here's the uncomfortable realization. It may be both. Trump framed himself as the singular actor who could fix trade deficits, punish adversaries, and project strength without bureaucratic delay. Congress is now asserting that unilateralism is precisely the danger. That concentration of decision-making around one volatile individual constitutes institutional risk. That is not routine disagreement. That is a declaration of instability at the center of power. When senators vote to override a president's veto preemptively, they are not negotiating. They are anticipating obstruction. And when they move to limit military escalation authority, they are not debating foreign policy nuance. They are signaling distrust in judgment. Distrust at that level inside a governing party signals something deeper than factionalism. It signals fear of consequence, legal consequence, electoral consequence, historical consequence. Because if tariffs trigger economic contraction, the blame radiates outward. If military escalation spirals, the stain is permanent. Senators understand that proximity to executive overreach can become liability. Distancing is not rebellion, it is insulation. But insulation reshapes the presidency in real time. Imagine a White House where executive orders face immediate bipartisan scrutiny, where statutory delegations are reinterpreted narrowly, where threats of veto no longer paralyze legislative will. That is not symbolic pushback, that is functional containment. And containment can accelerate. If investigations intensify, if budget negotiations become leverage points, if confirmations hinge on executive restraint, the presidency becomes structurally constrained even without formal removal. Authority remains on paper. Power shrinks in practice. This is the point of no return, not because Trump leaves office, because the perception of his inevitability dissolves. Once a president is seen as overridable, the mystique fades. And in politics, perception of strength often equals strength. The deeper question is whether this moment represents temporary turbulence or lasting shift. Is Congress rediscovering its constitutional backbone, or is it simply responding to polling data and economic discomfort? Motive matters less than outcome. If power is reclaimed and retained, the office changes. History pivots not only through dramatic expulsions, but through incremental reclamations. Death by 1,000 statutory clarifications. Authority narrowed line by line, emergency powers questioned, delegations revoked. The Senate's 68 votes may look procedural. They are not. They are a statement that executive latitude has limits, that loyalty has boundaries, that fear is negotiable. And when fear becomes negotiable, control weakens. What we are witnessing is not a clean break. It is a stress test of separation of powers, of party cohesion, of constitutional design under strain. The outcome is not predetermined, but the signal is unmistakable. A president who once expanded authority through aggression now faces a legislature testing its own spine. Whether this becomes a sustained rebalancing or a brief flare of resistance depends on what happens next. Budgets, investigations, confirmations, foreign policy crises, each will reveal whether 68 votes were anomaly or opening salvo. What cannot be ignored is this: the presidency is powerful, but not invincible. When Congress chooses to act with supermajority force, even a dominant executive must recalibrate. That recalibration is happening now, in real time. If you want to understand the future of American power, watch these votes. Watch who crosses lines. Watch who survives. Because the real story is not about tariffs or Venezuela. It is about whether institutional gravity can pull authority back from the brink before concentration hardens into permanence. Moments like this determine whether constitutional safeguards are theory or practice. Stay alert to the next fracture. They rarely announce themselves twice.